The forest near Lviv was silent, blanketed in snow, and deathly still. In a makeshift trench half frozen into the Ukrainian earth, a Soviet partisan unit huddled for warmth, surrounded by German patrols and cut off from all supply lines. They were 12 men and 1 woman, malnourished, frostbitten, and on the brink of collapse. Their food had run out 2 days earlier. Ammunition was low. Spirits were lower, and in that silence, something ancient and primal settled in. They would die here if nothing changed. Lieutenant Yuri Antonov, a 29-year-old former Red Army officer turned partisan leader, had seen hunger before, but never like this. The men didn't complain. There was no point. Even the younger ones had stopped talking. Some chewed leather straps just to fool their stomachs. The radio was dead. The woods around them were laced with German mines. Moving by foot meant certain death, but one route remained, one hope. Worn and hooved, a chestnut-colored horse named Sava. Sava wasn't a war horse. He was a farm animal, taken from a nearby village months earlier when the unit passed through. Elderly, with a notched ear and a limp from a healed break. He had pulled their supply sled for weeks before being left behind near the woods too weak, they thought, for combat use. But Yuri remembered the way Sava had once navigated through man-ridden trails, as if guided by instinct. He wasn't fast. He wasn't young, but he knew the terrain. The plan, if it could be called that, was desperate. They would strap a message to Sava, written in pencil on the back of an old propaganda flyer. The note gave their coordinates and condition, and begged for rations and medicine. There was a supply cask 45 kilometers to the east, guarded by a partisan relay team. If Sava could reach it, if he didn't freeze, starve, or get shot, their lives might be saved. If not, they'd run out of time by week's end. Before dawn, they brought Sava out of hiding. His breath steamed in the cold, and his eyes were dull but alert. Yuri placed a wool blanket over his back and tied the message inside a small canvas pouch beneath it. He whispered into the horse's ear-knot orders, "Just hope." Then, with a gentle slap to the flank, he let go. Sava stood there for a moment, as if deciding. Then he turned toward the tree line and walked. No one spoke as the horse disappeared into the white fog. In war, survival was rarely heroic. It was random, ugly, and cruel. But in that moment, every man in the trench had something they hadn't felt in days. A reason to hope. They didn't know that Sava's journey would last 6 days, through blizzards, enemy checkpoints, and silence. They only knew that he was Gonan, that their lives now hung on 4 tired legs and a heartbeat. The snow had deepened overnight, turning the old logging trail into a white void. Sava moved slowly, head low, his breath rising in clouds that vanished into the freezing air. His hooves sank into the powder with each step, crunching softly. There were no human voices, no birds, no engine hums, only the sound of his body pushing forward. He was alone, but the weight on his side, the small canvas pouch, held a message meant for 12 starving partisans, and somewhere in that aging body, he seemed to understand that the road he followed wasn't marked on any map. It had once connected farms and villages before being swallowed by the war. Now it ran through territory regularly, patrolled by German troops. The forest grew denser, trees leaning like silent witnesses, a rusted sign barely visible beneath the snow-red Stara Droga. The old road. It was a path few dared take anymore, filled with rumors of mines, snipers, and patrol checkpoints. But Sava didn't hesitate. He walked as if guided by memory older than the war itself. At midday, Sava approached the first ruins. What had once been a small village. The chimneys still stood, but the roofs had long since collapsed. Shattered window frames blinked like empty eyes. He paused only briefly, sniffing the wind, before pressing forward. Inside one of the burned buildings, a German soldier stirred. Young, perhaps 18. He spotted the horse through a cracked wall, reeflay in hand. For a moment, he aimed, then lowered the weapon. Just a stray farm horse, he thought. Nothing worth wasting a bullet on. Sava kept moving, unaware of the life he huspared, and the one that had just spared him. Beyond the village, the road narrowed into a ravine, its sides iced and treacherous. The wind howled louder here, funneled through the frozen stone. Sava's legs trembled slightly with each step. He had no shoes, no protection. Just thick hooves, hardened by years of work. His gait slowed, then picked up again. Every few meters, he paused, nostrils flaring, sniffing for wire. Scent, danger. Somehow, instinct guided him through. That night, he found shelter beneath a collapsed bridge. The stone arch had fallen during a skirmish the previous year, creating a hollow space where snow didn't reach. Sava curled in the drift, chest rising and falling slowly. He hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. His ribs showed faintly beneath his winter coat, yet the pouch still hung at his side. Untouched, a mission assigned not with rank or voice, but with trust and something deeper. Back in the trench, Lieutenant Yuri marked another day on a torn piece of paper. No word, no signal. Just the ache of hunger and silence. But as he looked into the eyes of his soldiers, tired, frostbitten, but still alive, he whispered, "He's out there. I know he is." They all nodded, but said nothing, because deep inside, every man knew the truth. If the horse failed, so will Tay. The morning mist rolled in like smoke, thick and blinding. Sava's breath joined it, swirling around his muzzle as he stepped carefully along a narrow, frost-covered trail. The trees were thinner now. The sound of boots and trucks had been drifting in and out of the silence for over an hour. He was getting close to the edge, the German-controlled perimeter, marked not by signs, but by presence. The horses that had come through this area before rarely returned. Sava didn't know that. He only knew forward. A few kilometers ahead, an old supply checkpoint had been converted into a small German outpost, 2 guard posts, a wooden barrier, and a single radio tent. It was a temporary position, manned by 4 soldiers, one of whom, Private Hans Keller, had grown tired of the silence. From his position, he heard the faint crunching of snow and raised his rifle. "Another fox," he muttered, before pausing. A silhouette moved through the fog. Larger, slower. A horse. Sava emerged from the mist, like a ghost, ears forward, tail low, walking steadily down the middle of the road. He wasn't trotting. He wasn't panicking. He looked exactly like what he was trained to appear as. A stray, dusty, dirty, lost. No harness, no saddle. The pouch beneath his blanket was hidden carefully between folds of fabric. To the untrained eye, he was nothing more than a leftover from a nearby farm, wandering for food. "Don't shoot," said one of the older guards. "It's just a peasant's horse. Could be useful." Coletta nodded, lowering his rifle. Strange time for it to be alone. The officer in charge, a sergeant with a thin mustache and a long coat, approached Sava slowly, looking into the horse's eyes. "He doesn't seem afraid," he noted. "That's what worries me." But after a moment, he waved the horse through. "Let it go. We don't have time for livestock." And just like that, Sava passed through a German checkpoint unchallenged. No shots, no alarms. Just blind luck and his own calm. Behind him, the soldiers returned to their post, none the wiser. But what they failed to see would haunt them later, that the old horse had just walked straight through enemy lines, carrying intelligence that could change the outcome of a desperate standoff. As the day wore on, the fog lifted, revealing open hills and cracked fences ahead. Sava's legs moved more slowly now. His breath came harder. The snow had thickened again, yet he kept walking, step by step. He moved farther from danger and closer to the only thing that mattered, delivering the message strapped to his side. It wasn't glory that moved him. It was memory of men who had fed him, trusted him, spared him. In war, loyalty often died with the first bullet, but not this time. Not with Sava. By the 4th day, tea cold wasn't tea, just numbing it, was cruel. The snow had turned to ice, layering the hills like glass, and every step sliced into Sava's legs like knives. His gait had slowed to a shuffle. His ribs showed more sharply. His eyes, once alert, were now dulled by fatigue. The forest had thinned, replaced by open terrain, windswept and lifeless. There was no shelter, no food, and no one. But the pouch beneath his blanket still clung tightly to his body, like the memory of why he hadn't stopped. Somewhere deep inside his instincts, something told him that he wasn't just walking, he was returning. Sava had hauled wood and hay through these hills in a life before war. Long before soldiers and tanks, there had been children who fed him apples, and farmers who spoke to him gently. Now, the same roads were soaked in war's silence. Still, some memory of those voices pushed him forward, one heavy hoof at a time. By midday, Sava collapsed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no cry, no collapse of thunder, just a soft thud as he dropped to his knees beside a broken fence line. Snow began to gather on his back. His breathing slowed. His body, used and old, had carried him through 60 kilometers of ice and death. But even will has its limits. His ears flicked once, then nothing. That's when the boy appeared. 10-year-old Milo Yannick had been hiding with his mother in the ruins of a stone barn, just a few meters away. They were refugees, Polish civilians, evicted during a German sweep months earlier. Milo had gone out searching for wood when he saw the shape in the snow. At first, he thought it was a fallen soldier, but as he crept closer, he saw the hooves, the breath, a horse, a blanket, and something tied underneath. He ran back for his mother. She came with a tin bowl of boiled barley and a rag soaked in warm water. 4 hours, they worked 2 warm Sava's legs, cleared the snow from his body, and spoon-feed him soft grain. Most horses wouldn't have survived the night. But Sava wasn't most horsey. As the sun faded behind the hills, he opened one eye, groaned faintly, and shifted. Milo cried out in joy. The horse had risen again. Milo's mother, Irana Yannick, had lived through enough war to know that nothing came without risk, not even a starving horse. She knelt beside the animal as he stirred beneath the makeshift blanket they had thrown over him. His flanks were still cold, but the barley and warm claws had done enough to keep his pulse steady. She brushed her fingers along the stiff fabric tied beneath the horse's side, and felt something tucked there, a pouch. Carefully, she untied the strap, opened it, and removed a folded piece of paper smudged with damp snow and sweat. The note was handwritten in Cyrillic, crushed but clear. Irana could read enough to understand the words. Trapped, out of food. Coordinates inside. Please help. God be with you. Her breath caught. This wasn't just a wandering horse, it was a lifeline. She turned to Milo, who was still feeding the horse handfuls of hay. He's not lost, she said quietly. He's on a mission. Her mind raced. If German patrols were nearby, they might shoot the horse on sight. If she was caught with this letter, they could be executed as collaborators. Still, something about the animal, his quiet strength, his patience, even in pain, made the decision for her. Irana had seen soldiers abandon their wounded, but this horse had kept walking. Alone. For days, she folded the letter and tucked it back into the pouch, tying it tight beneath his blanket again. We help him, she said. But only at first, light. He must rest, and we must be ready to hide if things go wrong. That night, Irena boiled the last of their barley and let Sava eat until he could no longer chew. Milo stayed beside him, whispering stories into his ear, stories about his father who'd gone missing in the early days of the war, about the dog they'd lost in the evacuation, about the home they used to have before soldiers burned it to the ground. Sava didn't move much, but when Milo touched his mane, he blinked slow, tired, but aware. He was listening. Before dawn, Irana packed a small satchel with bread crusts, sugar cubes, and a chunk of saltol they could spare. She tied it next to the message pouch. Sava stood shakily, legs trembling, but upright. He had rested. He had eaten. He had been seen not as a tool, but as a life worth saving. It was an og. Irena kissed her son's forehead, then stepped back. Let him go, she said. Milo opened the barn gate slowly. Sava stood for a moment, eyes scanning the hills. Then he stepped forward again into the frost-covered world. One hoof, then another. The hills were calling. The mission was not over. And now, behind him, 2 strangers had quietly joined that mission, not by oath, not by duty, but by something older than war. Kindness. The 5th day began with silence, but not the peaceful kind. As Sava moved eastward through a low valley, the wind carried a smell, sharp and metallic, almost familiar. Predators. The snow here was less pure, trampled and marked. Hoofprints, pawprints, blood. The winter forests of eastern Poland were not only battlegrounds for men, but also hunting grounds for wolves, who had long since learned to follow death wherever war made it easy. Sava's pace had steadied, but his energy was fraying. The food Irana had given him gave only a brief spark. Now the ache in his legs returned, joined by a new sensation being watched. From the ridge above the ravine, two gray shadows moved in silence, their forms slipping between trees like smoke. These were not wild, reckless scavengers. These were experienced hunters, and they could smell the weakness in the old horse below. His steps slowed. The message at his side shifted in its pouch. And still, he pressed forward. By noon, snow began to fall again, light at first, tending heavy, blinding flakes. It muffled sound and covered tracks, which was both blessing and curse. Sava could no longer hear the wolves, but neither could they follow him as easily. The terrain forced him into a narrow gully, where broken tree limbs and frozen brush scraped against his legs. He stumbled once, catching his side on a jagged log. Blood dotted the snow. He didn't cry out. He didn't stop. A howl split the air behind him. Close. Sava turned slightly, his body tense, eyes wide. The gray shapes reappeared at the rim of the gully. One leapt down, circling slowly. The other waited above, watching. Sava wasn't built for defense. He had no teeth to fight with, no sharp hooves to strike, but he had something else, and that memory told him one thing: keep going. Always forward. He broke into a trot, not fast, not smooth, but urgent. The ravine led to a broken stone fence line ahead, possibly part of an old estate or a checkpoint. If he could reach it, he might lose them. The wolves gave chase, snow spraying behind them. Sava veered left, crashing through brush, nearly slipping again. His breath came in gasps, loud and ragged, but the wolves didn't close in. They followed, tested, hunted, but didn't strike. Something in the old horse unnerved them. Some part of his calm, even in panic, kept them at bay. By late afternoon, the snow covered the trail completely. The wolves had vanished, faded back into the trees. Sava's sides were streaked with blood and ice, but the pouch still held. The message was dry, the satchel of food nearly empty. He had lived through ambushes, checkpoints, exhaustion, and now nature itself, but even he couldn't know how close he truly was. Just one day remained. One final stretch, and the hunger behind him had not yet given up. The final day began not with light, but with cold so deep it felt like stone. Frost clung to Sava's coat like armor, his legs stiff from the night's chill, but the morning air carried something new, a smell of smoke. Faint, distant, but human. It meant life. It meant the edge of the woods was near, but between him and that promise lay a final obstacle. The Saray River, frozen solid ... or so it seemed. Sava reached the embankment. Just past noon, the ice stretched wide, white and silent, with faint cracks like lightning frozen in time. To the north was a bridge, long collapsed. To the south, patrols had been spotted days earlier. The river was the only path. He sniffed the air, placed a hoof on the ice, and waited. It held. Slowly, carefully, he stepped forward, one hoof at a time. The wind bit harder across the open stretch, but the weight of the mission pressed harder still. Halfway across, the ice let out a long, aching groan. A crack spread beneath him, teanet fierce, then spidering outward. He froze, breath shallow. Another step. The ice trembled. A hut to move. With every ounce of remaining strength, Sava pressed forward, ignoring the pull in his muscles, the sharp pain in his ribs. 10 more steps. Then 5, then the ice beneath his back leg gave way. With a crash, his hindquarters dropped, water surging around him. The cold was instant and merciless. He kicked, trying to gain traction. His front legs held the edge, scraping at the ice. The The pouch under his belly was soaked, but still tied tight. He thrashed once, twice. Then, a moment of stillness. His eyes closed. And for a second, it looked like he would sink, but memory stirred again. Sava's mind flashed with Imidizuri's voice, Irana's gentle touch, Milo's warmth, the sound of laughter in the fields long before war came. These were not battle cries. These were anchors, and they pulled him back. With a final lunge, he heaved himself forward. Ice cracked beneath him, but didn't break. He dragged his soaked body across the last meters, water freezing instantly on his fur. He reached solid ground, collapsed, and lay still. Minutes passed. Then he rose, barely standing, legs shaking. Sava moved on. The forest beyond was thinner now. A small cabin sat nestled among the trees. Smoke rose from its chimney. A figure stepped out, rifle lowered, eyes wide. It was Sergeant Mikhail Reznov, commander of the partisan relay post. He recognized the symbol painted faintly on the horse's shoulder. His eyes went to the soaked pouch, and in that moment, he realized the mission had made it. Sava collapsed again this time, not from defeat, but from duty fulfilled. The message was delivered. The unit trapped in the western woods would now have a chance. But this story was far from over. Sergeant Mikhail Reznov stood over the collapsed horse with the message in his hand, eyes scanning the torn notes soaked from ice and mud. The writing was faint, but still legible. Coordinates, urgent plea for rations, and the number of men trapped. 12 soldiers. 1 horse. 6 days. Around him, his small partisan group watched in silence. Some didn't believe what they were seeing. A half-dead, frost-covered animal had done what trained couriers hadn't in weeks. It wasn't just remarkable. It was almost impossible. They moved quickly. Food was scarce, but enough had been stashed in the supply depot to send out what was needed. A makeshift sled was prepared, loaded with dry bread, canned meat, medicine, blankets. The forest was still dangerous, crawling with patrols and hidden checkpoints. But Reznov wasn't hesitating. "We move now," he said. "Before darkness returns." The men nodded. All but one, a young scout named Pavel, who stared at the horse still shivering in the snow. "What about him?" he asked quietly. Sava lay barely conscious, legs curled under his body. Steam rose from his fur as soldiers poured warm water on him, trying to bring his core temperature back up. His breathing was shallow. Labored. A wound on his side, reopened from the river fall, bled slowly through the blanket. Most men expected he would die within the hour. He had nothing left to give. But Pavel disagreed. He got here when no one else could. He deserves to see the end. Reznov considered the words, then made a quiet choice. Harness him. If he can't stand, we leave him with food and cover, but if a duet. He leads us in. They wrapped Sava in a thicker coat, placed a leather harness around his chest, and offered him a handful of dried oats. He stirred, one eye opening. Then, with effort that made even the toughest men flinch, he stood. The sled creaked behind him, attached by rope and improvised straps. Sava trembled under the weight, but did not fall. Step by step, the convoy moved, through frostbitten woods, past scorched trees, over land soaked in history and blood. They moved without speaking, boots crunching softly behind the old horse leading them. For hours, they pressed east, following the path Sava had carved in reverse, retracing one of the most unlikely rescue missions of the war. Night began to fall. The cold deepened, but ahead, a cluster of trenches lay hidden in the snow. Somewhere in those holes, Lieutenant Yuri Antonov still waited, still hoped. He hadn't eaten in days. His men were barely alive. But as dusk settled, a sound broke the silent sled, runners over ice. And the first shape to appear wasn't a man. It was a horse. The trench had become more grave than shelter. Snow layered its edges. Frozen mud caked every corner. And the silence between the 12 men inside was thicker than the cold. Lieutenant Yuri Antonov sat huddled near a burned-out oil lantern, his fingers too numb to write, too tired to pray. Hunger had gnawed away at strength and spirit. It had been nearly a week since Sava was sent. Most had stopped hoping. But Yuri hadn't. Not entirely. Then came the sound, faint at first like wood on stone or breath through dry reeds. The men barely noticed, but Yuri stood. His ears had been trained in war, and he knew the difference between silence and a silence about to be broken. He climbed to the edge of the trench and scanned the dark tree line. A shadow moved. Then another, and from the snow emerged, not the enemy but a horse, dragging behind him a sled. And hope. The men stumbled from the trench like ghosts, eyes wide, disbelieving. They surrounded the sled, touching tins of meat and loaves of black bread as if they might vanish. Tears came fast, from soldiers too proud to admit they'd been ready to die. Behind the sled, Sava stood motionless, head lowered, steam rising from his back. He was shaking. Blood had dried along his ribs, but in his eyes, there was still awareness and something deeper. Recognition. Yuri stepped closer. "Sava," he whispered, as if saying the name would collapse the moment. The horse blinked. Then, slowly, he stepped forward until his nose touched Yuri's chest. The lieutenant dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead against the animal's. Around them, hardened men broke into quiet sobs, not from weakness but from the overwhelming weight of survival, of reunion, of witnessing something they couldn't explain. That night, fires were lit. Rations were warmed. Wounds were treated. It wasn't a feast, but it was life. The men shared everything, including the story of the horse who had left them and returned, crossing enemy lines, rivers, predators, and hunger. Some called it luck. Others whispered of miracles, but all agreed on one thing. Without Sava, they would be dead. Sava didn't eat much. Just a few handfuls of grain. He slept standing, as horses sometimes do, surrounded by men who owed him everything. No speeches were made, no medals hung, but as snow fell gently over the trench. Yuri wrote in his pocket diary, 12 men lived today, because a horse remembered the way home. The war would not end that winter, but something within those men did. After the rescue, Lieutenant Judia's unit was quietly They rejoined the wider resistance, eventually linking with Soviet lines during the final push against the German retreat. The official reports never mentioned the horse. The courier who broke through enemy lines was listed as unknown partisan. But among the 12 men, the truth lived in every retelling. The courier had 4 legs and a heart stronger than most soldiers. Sava was taken to a rural village on the Ukrainian border. There, in a farm repurposed as a partisan rest post, he was given a small, stable, fresh straw and regular meals. His wounds were treated by a field nurse who had once been a veterinarian. The soldiers who passed through the village often came to see the trench horse, leaving apples, bits of bread, or simply resting in silence by his side. He was never alone. Yuri visited. Often, on a beat, he brought a sugar cube in his pocket, which Sava would sniff out before Yuri even stepped into the barn. He spoke softly to the horse, sometimes reading aloud from his journal. The war had taken nearly everything from him. Homeland, peace, but in Sava, he found something untouched by brutality. Not innocence, but loyalty. That loyalty had saved them all. When the war finally ended in 1945, Yuri returned to civilian life in Lviv. He became a teacher, and in his classroom, above the blackboard, he kept an old photo, a snow-covered trench, a sled, and beside it, a thin, frostbitten horse. No one ever asked about it, until one day, a student finally did. And Yuri, after a long silence, told the story. Not the version written in history books, but the real one. The one that made grown men weep. Years passed. Sava lived peacefully until the age of 23. Remarkable age for a working horse, especially one who had survived front lines and frost. He died quietly in his sleep, under the care of a farmer who had once been one of the men he saved. A small plaque was carved from local wood and nailed to the barn wall. It read simply, "Sava, the one who returned." Today, there is no grand statue, no museum display, but in eastern Poland, in quiet villages and among old veterans, The story of the horse who carried hope across enemy lines still lives on. In a war defined by machines and destruction, his story was one of silence, endurance, and memory. Not all heroes speak. Some simply walk. And some walk until they can walk no more because they know someone is waiting.